Hello everybody, this video will be all about transformations and transitions and panning and zooming and everything that relates to moving things around, stretching things around, and how that relates to drawing things in our frame buffer. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to move our objects that we're drawing, but we are drawing pixels, we're not actually drawing objects, we're drawing a pixel representation of our object. And we actually cannot move the pixels themselves. Like, there's no way of moving physically a pixel in the screen of the user. But we can instead just draw different pixels and achieve the same result. And let's see how that looks. So this is a diagram from my drawing rectangles video. There's a link in the description below if you haven't seen it. It's basically just different representations of a triangle. Of a rectangle. So we have like width and height in the position, or the mean and max point, or like the bounds left and right of button, and how that translates to how the pixels are laid out in the frame buffer. So anyway, so we have these representations of a rectangle, and we want to be able to move the rectangle around. So we can move it around left and right just by changing the position, as you can see there, or changing the min and max in the horizontal axis, or changing the left and right in the other representation. We can move it up and down, the same thing. As you can see, the width and height representation is very convenient to do that, because the width and height doesn't need to change. All that needs to change is the coordinates in the position. And we can do scaling, like a uniform scaling. So in this case, we're not changing the position, but we're only changing the width and height. And we can do non-uniform scaling, where we just change the width or just change the height. Okay, so let's talk about transition, like how things move and change over time. So we're drawing every frame from scratch completely. So we can emulate transition by just drawing different pixels at each frame. And if we account for the transformation over time as we draw different frames, it may look like the rectangle is changing. So if we do it fast enough, it looks like the rectangle is moving. The pixels themselves aren't moving at all. The frame buffer isn't changing at all in terms of its layout. We're just lighting up different pixels. Okay, let's talk about coordinate frames. So we have a reference coordinate frame, which is a frame buffer. We can think of it as like the space of the screen. You can see like screen space. Technically, it's more accurate to say the window, but screen space is a very common term. And we're representing positions currently in pixel space, like in pixels. But we could choose to represent the positions and coordinates in another coordinate frame. That can be useful. And then we can convert, when it comes to drawing, then we can convert back to pixel space, to the screen space, when we want to draw things. So how does that look? So we have our frame buffer, and it's kind of constant in terms of its layout. And we have some abstract representation of a coordinate frame that we want to work with. And we can have multiple coordinate frames that are abstract with. So we can represent the rectangle instead of in respect to the pixels. We can represent the rectangle with respect to some other coordinate frames. So for in this example, the coordinate frame is in the middle, so it's very convenient to like stretch and squash it horizontally or vertically, uniformly or non-uniformly from the center, if that's what we want. We can choose another coordinate frame to represent the rectangle in. And this is going to be very convenient for moving things if we want to keep the top left corner of it at the same place as we squash and stretch, as we'll see. So we can move the coordinate frame itself. So it's instead of moving the representation of the rectangle itself, we're just moving the coordinate frame in which it is defined in relation to our frame buffer's coordinate frame. Okay, so we can just move it around left and right and up and down, and this is how it ends up looking. The rectangle itself, its representation is not changing at all. We're just moving the coordinate frame in which it is defined. Okay, and then we can also stretch that coordinate frame uniformly or non-uniformly, and it can be very useful to do that. And if we have like multiple things that we want to apply the same transformation to together, then we can just represent both of the rectangles here in the same coordinate frame. And then when we stretch and squash the coordinate frame, it applies to both. If we do non-uniform or we move it around, they go together. Okay, let's talk about transformation order. So if you remember from basic arithmetic, so addition is commutative. What does that mean? It means that we can change the order around of the addition, and it doesn't change the result. In 2D, it looks like that if we move things first to the right and then down, it's the same thing as moving first down and then to the right. We end up in the same exact same configuration at the end of it. And addition is also associative, so that can also be useful to keep in mind, so we can group things in any way we want and still get the same result. So we can combine multiple movements into one movement if we want. Multiplication is also commutative with respect to itself. So all this thing is like we're just combining additions. We're not combining additions with multiplications. We'll get to that. And with multiplications, again, if we only combine multiplications, we can do it in any order, and we get the same result. And how does that look in terms of 2D? If we first stretch it horizontally and then stretch it vertically, it looks the same as we first stretch it vertically and then horizontally. We end up in the same configuration exactly. And multiplication is also associative. So if we have successive multiplications, we can group them in any way, and we still get the same result. So we can combine multiple stretching and squashing into a single squash stretch operation. But if we try to combine multiplication and addition, that's not associative. So if we group things around differently, we end up with a different result. Let's see how that looks in terms of 2D. So let's say we stretch it and then we move it, but we're not moving it just 1 pixel, we're moving it like 1.4, which is a little bit more, but it's not enough to actually move the pixel representation around. So that looks like that. But if we first move it by that 1.4 pixels, and then we try to stretch it, now we've overshooted because the stretching had also applied onto the movement of 1.4 that we did, and it ended up overshooting. So as you can see, if we change the order in which we apply the same transformations, we're not ending up with the same result. All right, let's talk about panning. So up until now, we just talked about moving things around with respect to our frame buffer. But let's say we want to actually pan around. That's actually moving our view of the screen. So up until now, we just kept our view of the scene constant, and we just move things around within it. In this case, we want to do the opposite. We want to keep the objects in the scene constant and not moving them. We kind of just want to move our view of them. So if we move it, it kind of looks like this. So we want to be able to just move our pixels, our frame buffer, to the right, but we can't actually do that. So we have to move our pixels and our representation of the frame buffer itself as together along with the movement. So it ends up looking like this. So if we move it around if we move the frame buffer along with our coordinate frame, it ends up looking like this. Now instead, what we can do instead is just move the coordinate systems of the things that represent our objects in the opposite way, and we end up achieving getting the same pixel representation. This is akin to like if you've ever experienced, like if you sit in a train and you was look at the window, and the window takes, there's another train on the subsequent track, adjacent track, and it fills up your entire window, so you can't really see anything except the other train. And then there's like a noise, and you start moving, and you say, okay, well, now we're starting to move, and you see the train going in the other direction, and then it goes and goes, and then it passes, and then you see, well, actually the you can see the station, and you actually haven't moved this whole time. You get this weird feeling. It's very easy to trick our perception this way. So we thought that we were moving because we saw the other representation of the rest of our world that's in our view. So we thought that we're the ones that moving, but it turned up that we actually didn't move at all, and it was the train that's actually moving. Same thing if you can just put two fingers in front of your face and just move them to the right, and then if you do instead, you just put two fingers in front of your face and you slide your head to the left, you can end up, you see that you end up seeing the same kind of transition. Anyway, that's a long-winded explanation of basically saying that we can translate and move and transform the objects in our scene in the inverse way of how we want our view of it to move. And we end up with the exact same result, as you can see. Let's go to zooming. So zooming is the same thing, just instead of moving, we're talking about stretching and squashing. So what we want to be able to do is squash and stretch our view of the world. But again, we have to take the frame buffer with us, so it ends up looking like this. And as before, instead of doing that, we can just stretch the entire world in the opposite way, and we end up with the same pixel representation at the end of the process if we do that. That's it. Thank you. If you've enjoyed the video, you can hit the like button. If you want to be notified for more videos like this, you can subscribe to the channel. That's it. Thank you. Bye.